No brand, no company can stand still and just rely on one customer group. You have to bring in new riders, and that's what we're doing.
It's always difficult to describe it because you actually have to experience.
The thunder of Harley-Davidson motorcycles has long symbolized not only the spirit of American freedom, but also the industrial prowess that built the United States into a modern economic powerhouse. For decades, Harley-Davidson has represented a proud legacy of American manufacturing, craftsmanship, and cultural identity, with its roots firmly planted in the heartland of Wisconsin. Its rumbling engines and chrome-laden frames became icons that traversed highways across not just the United States, but the world. Yet, in an unprecedented move that sent shockwaves through the business community and the broader American public, Harley-Davidson CEO Jochen Zeitz has revealed that the company will be shutting down production in the United States and relocating its manufacturing operations abroad. This momentous decision was triggered by the economic repercussions stemming from a new wave of tariffs imposed by the newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump, which have rippled across the globe, reshaping the trade landscape in dramatic and far-reaching ways. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The announcement was not just the culmination of months of economic uncertainty, but a manifestation of how interconnected and vulnerable American manufacturing had become to global trade dynamics. The Trump administration's introduction of sweeping tariffs on a wide array of trade partners was intended to bolster domestic industries and protect American jobs from foreign competition. However, the strategy immediately drew sharp responses from the United States' largest trading partners, who swiftly imposed retaliatory tariffs of their own. The result was a swift escalation in trade tensions, creating an environment of uncertainty and cost increases for businesses operating on both sides of the ocean. For Harley-Davidson, whose motorcycles have been exported to over 100 countries, the new tariffs presented a stark reality. Selling American-made motorcycles in crucial overseas markets would become prohibitively expensive, severely impacting demand and threatening the company's long-term viability. For decades, Harley-Davidson has prided itself on its Made in America ethos, often leveraging this image in its global marketing campaigns. The brand's identity was intertwined with American exceptionalism, independence, and ingenuity. The move to shift production overseas, then, marked not only an economic calculation but also a symbolic departure from the brand's deeply held values. This decision did not come easily. It was the result of extensive internal debate, financial modeling, and an assessment of the broader risks posed by the new tariffs regime. For Jochen Zeitz and his executive team, the choice was nothing short of existential. Either absorb the crippling costs of tariffs and risk collapsing international sales, or find a new way to keep the brand alive in a changed global landscape. The specific mechanics of the tariffs made it almost impossible for Harley-Davidson to sustain its traditional business model. Tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, critical components for the production of motorcycles, immediately drove up the cost of raw materials. On the other side, the European Union, one of Harley-Davidson's largest overseas markets, slapped counter tariffs on American motorcycles, making them thousands of dollars more expensive for European consumers. Markets in Asia too responded with their own measures, further raising costs and undermining demand. The result was a pincer movement that threatened to strangle the company's most lucrative international sales channels while simultaneously raising its cost base at home. The impact on Harley-Davidson's American workforce was immediate and profound. The closure of production lines in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Missouri, facilities that had in some cases operated for over a century, was not just a matter of economics but a wrenching social and cultural loss. Generations of American workers had built careers and families around the security provided by Harley-Davidson's presence in their communities. For these workers, the plant closures meant the loss of stable, well-paying jobs, the erosion of community identity, and the breaking of a link to a proud industrial heritage. The ripple effects extended outward, affecting suppliers, local businesses, and service providers that depended on the company for their livelihoods. The consequences of Harley-Davidson's decision reverberated far beyond the company's immediate workforce and the motorcycle industry. The move provided a case study in the unintended consequences of protectionist trade policies in an era of globalized supply chains. The logic behind tariffs was to support domestic manufacturing and create American jobs by making imported goods more expensive and domestic goods relatively more competitive. In practice, however, the interconnected nature of modern manufacturing meant that costs increased for companies that relied on both domestic and imported materials, often leading to higher prices for consumers and, paradoxically, a loss of competitiveness abroad. As Harley-Davidson shifted its production to new locations overseas, it faced a host of new challenges and complexities. Setting up manufacturing operations in countries with different regulatory environments, labor markets, and supply chain dynamics required significant investment and a rapid learning curve. While some costs, particularly those related to tariffs, could be reduced, the company had to grapple with issues of quality control, logistics, and brand perception. There was an inherent risk that the Made in America mystique, so integral to Harley-Davidson's global appeal, would be diluted by the move overseas. International consumers who prized Harley-Davidson's American heritage might view the new bikes differently, affecting long-term brand loyalty and sales. The broader American business community watched the developments at Harley-Davidson with a mixture of concern and resignation. For decades, many U.S. companies had operated under the assumption that the United States, with its advanced infrastructure, skilled workforce, and stable regulatory environment, was an ideal base for manufacturing. The eruption of trade wars and the imposition of tit-for-tat tariffs upended these assumptions, forcing companies to rethink not just their supply chains, but their entire approach to doing business. In industries as diverse as automotive, electronics, and agriculture, executives began to reevaluate the cost-benefit calculus of manufacturing in the United States versus abroad. Harley-Davidson's high-profile departure served as both a warning and a harbinger of broader trends to come. The decision also exposed the limitations of economic nationalism in a world defined by cross-border flows of goods, capital, and technology. Harley-Davidson's situation illustrated how even iconic American brands, with deep cultural roots and loyal domestic followings, could not insulate themselves from the forces of globalization. The modern economy is a complex web of dependencies, where a change in trade policy in one country can trigger a cascade of reactions across the globe. By shutting down U.S. production and moving abroad, Harley-Davidson was adapting to a new reality, one in which global competitiveness depended on the ability to navigate an ever-shifting terrain of tariffs, regulations, and consumer preferences. The public reaction to the announcement was swift and deeply divided. Some saw the decision as a betrayal of American workers and values, arguing that Harley-Davidson had abandoned its roots in pursuit of profit. Critics pointed to the company's history of marketing itself as a champion of American manufacturing, calling the move hypocritical and short-sighted. Others, however, recognized the profound pressures facing the company and saw the decision as a pragmatic response to an increasingly hostile trade environment. For many observers, the real blame lay with the broader trade policy choices that had made it nearly impossible for American manufacturers to compete on a level playing field. The economic implications of Harley-Davidson's move were also felt in Washington, D.C., where policymakers and trade experts debated the wisdom of using tariffs as a tool for achieving economic objectives. The company's exit provided ammunition for those who argued that protectionism, far from reviving American industry, could actually drive it offshore. The experience of Harley-Davidson highlighted the complexity of modern manufacturing, where even a brand as quintessentially American as Harley-Davidson was deeply reliant on global markets for both its inputs and its sales. The debate underscored the need for a more nuanced approach to trade policy, one that took into account the realities of global supply chains and the interconnected nature of the world economy. Beyond the immediate business and political ramifications, the event triggered a broader cultural reckoning about the meaning of American identity in a globalized world. For decades, products like Harley-Davidson motorcycles served as tangible expressions of American culture, projecting an image of rugged individualism, adventure, and self-reliance. The closure of U.S. production facilities forced a reconsideration of what it meant for something to be American-made, in an era when products are assembled from components sourced around the world. The question of whether the soul of Harley-Davidson could survive the transition to overseas manufacturing became a touchstone for a larger debate about the future of American industry and the values that underpin it. Within the company, the transition was managed with a mixture of regret and resolve. Harley-Davidson's leadership understood the symbolic weight of their decision, but they also recognized the existential threat posed by remaining in an untenable economic position. The company's communications emphasized its commitment to maintaining quality, innovation, and customer service, regardless of where production took place. At the same time, executives made efforts to support displaced workers, offering severance packages, retraining opportunities, and assistance in finding new employment. While these measures provided some relief, they could not fully offset the sense of loss felt by many employees and communities who had invested their lives and identities in the company. The move abroad also opened up new opportunities and risks for Harley-Davidson in the international marketplace. By relocating production to countries with lower costs and fewer trade barriers, the company hoped to regain its competitive edge in markets that had become virtually inaccessible under the new tariff regime. At the same time, Harley-Davidson faced heightened competition from other motorcycle manufacturers, many of whom already operated global supply chains and had developed strong brand loyalties in key markets. The challenge for Harley-Davidson was to maintain its reputation for quality and authenticity while adapting to the demands of a rapidly changing global economy. As Harley-Davidson's American factories began the process of winding down operations, the sights and sounds of assembly lines, once filled with the clang of metal and the hum of machines, gave way to a quiet, somber atmosphere. Workers who had spent decades building motorcycles that would travel the world now faced an uncertain future. Community leaders and local officials grappled with the challenge of replacing the economic and social contributions that the company had provided for generations. For many, the loss of Harley-Davidson production felt like the end of an era, an irrevocable shift in the nation's industrial landscape. The experience of Harley-Davidson also prompted soul-searching within the broader motorcycle community. Enthusiasts who had long cherished the brand for its American roots now confronted difficult questions about what it meant to support a company whose products were no longer made in the USA. Some vowed to remain loyal to Harley-Davidson regardless of where its bikes were manufactured, valuing the brand's history and engineering prowess above all else. Others looked elsewhere, seeking out domestic alternatives or shifting their allegiances to foreign brands that had become more affordable in the wake of shifting tariffs. The debate played out in online forums, at motorcycle rallies, and in dealerships across the country, reflecting the deep emotional connection that many people felt to the brand. The implications of Harley-Davidson's move extended to other industries as well. As news of the production shift spread, companies in sectors as diverse as automotive, agriculture, and consumer electronics began to reassess their own vulnerability to trade disruptions. Many initiated contingency plans, exploring ways to diversify their supply chains and reduce their reliance on any single country or market. For some, this meant increasing investments in automation and technology to offset rising labor and material costs. For others, it meant considering relocation or expansion abroad as a hedge against future trade volatility. The Harley-Davidson episode served as a catalyst for a broader rethinking of how American businesses operate in a globalized world. For the American economy as a whole, the loss of Harley-Davidson production raised uncomfortable questions about the long-term consequences of protectionist trade policies. While tariffs were intended to spur domestic investment and job creation, the reality for many companies was far more complex. Higher input costs, reduced access to foreign markets, and the threat of retaliation made it difficult for even the most established brands to maintain their competitive edge. The risk was that rather than reviving American manufacturing, tariffs could drive iconic companies offshore, eroding the very economic base they were meant to protect. Harley-Davidson's decision to relocate its production overseas in the face of sweeping tariffs marked a dramatic turn in both the company's history and the story of American manufacturing. Yet, the announcement was not merely an endpoint. It triggered a cascade of ripple effects that moved through the American economy, international markets, political circles, and even the psyche of everyday citizens. The world watched as the company, synonymous with the American dream, confronted realities that forced it to make choices once unthinkable. The days following the announcement saw the beginning of a new chapter for Harley-Davidson, and the implications unfurled in layers, each more complex than the last. The landscape of American manufacturing had already been evolving for decades before this seismic event. As Harley-Davidson prepared to ship out its production lines, a broader reckoning took hold within boardrooms and labor unions alike. Many American companies were now forced to confront a dilemma that had, until the tariffs, existed largely as a hypothetical. Whether to absorb unsustainable costs in the name of national loyalty, or to reimagine their businesses on a global scale. The cultural expectation that American companies would prioritize domestic workers and production clashed sharply with the realities of modern economics, where supply chains stretched across continents, and profits often depended on razor-thin margins in international sales. For Harley-Davidson, the immediate aftermath of announcing its exit from U.S. manufacturing was a whirlwind of logistical planning. Engineers, project managers, and consultants were mobilized to identify suitable overseas locations that could match or at least approximate the expertise and output of the American plants. Factors like political stability, labor quality, access to raw materials, transportation infrastructure, and proximity to major export markets all had to be carefully weighed. Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe emerged as leading contenders, not only due to their lower labor costs, but also their established track records in precision manufacturing and export-oriented economies. Some countries aggressively courted the company, offering tax incentives, expedited permitting, and promises of regulatory support. For these nations, hosting a company with Harley-Davidson's pedigree was a golden opportunity to burnish their reputations as hubs for high-value manufacturing. The planning process was marked by intensive negotiations with foreign governments and potential partners. Local authorities were eager to showcase their ability to attract and support blue-chip foreign investment. In exchange for committing to build or expand factories, Harley-Davidson secured concessions and benefits that would have been unthinkable in the U.S., where regulatory hurdles and labor costs had become formidable. These new facilities would not be simple carbon copies of the American originals. They would incorporate state-of-the-art automation and advanced production techniques that could maximize output while keeping operational costs to a minimum. As American production facilities wound down, a monumental task began: transferring knowledge. Teams of veteran Harley-Davidson engineers, line workers, and quality control specialists were sent abroad to train new staff, oversee the installation of machinery, and ensure that the intricate standards of Harley-Davidson's legacy were upheld. This was no small feat. The challenge was not only technical but cultural. The company's leadership had to instill the sense of pride, precision, and craftsmanship that had set Harley-Davidson apart for generations, all while operating in unfamiliar environments with different languages, traditions, and workplace norms. Meanwhile, the American workers left behind faced a daunting transition. In regions like Milwaukee, York, and Kansas City, the absence of Harley-Davidson loomed like a cloud over local economies. Efforts to retrain and re-employ displaced workers met with mixed success. Some were able to pivot into new careers, often with the help of community colleges and local initiatives. Others struggled to find equivalent wages or the same sense of pride and identity that came with building legendary motorcycles. These losses were not just economic, but emotional. For many, the Harley-Davidson name had woven itself into the fabric of their lives. Local leaders and policymakers grappled with how to fill the gap left by the company's departure, seeking to attract new industries or support entrepreneurship to revive their economies. At the national level, economists and think tanks pored over data to assess the impact of Harley-Davidson's move on the broader U.S. economy. The company's exit was seen as a warning sign of vulnerabilities in American manufacturing, particularly for companies heavily dependent on exports. Other industries, from agricultural machinery to high-end electronics, sought to avoid the same fate, lobbying for exemptions from tariffs or pushing for targeted relief measures. Some corporations invested in supply chain redundancy, establishing mirror operations in foreign countries to hedge against future shocks. Others redoubled their focus on domestic production, seeking to distinguish themselves as proudly American in a climate of growing uncertainty. Internationally, Harley-Davidson's arrival as a major employer was cause for celebration. In places like Thailand, Poland, and India, the construction of new manufacturing plants created jobs, spurred local suppliers, and contributed to economic development. Local economies adjusted quickly to serve the needs of a major multinational. Suppliers emerged to provide specialized parts. Logistics firms expanded to handle increased freight, and technical colleges began offering courses tailored to Harley-Davidson's requirements. In these new settings, Harley-Davidson was both a newcomer and a prestigious employer, attracting ambitious workers who viewed the company as a pathway to a better life. On the showroom floors in Europe, Asia, and beyond, the implications for the customer experience became evident. With tariffs driving up the cost of American-made bikes, the new overseas models became more affordable, restoring competitive pricing in key international markets. This, in turn, helped Harley-Davidson regain market share lost during the trade war escalation. The move also opened the door to the development of market-specific models, motorcycles designed with the preferences and riding conditions of each region in mind, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach exported from the US. European riders, for example, could now expect lighter, more fuel-efficient bikes, while Asian consumers might see the introduction of smaller displacement models better suited to congested urban environments. Harley-Davidson's shift overseas also set off a fresh wave of innovation within the company. Freed from some of the constraints of legacy US operations, the firm was able to invest more heavily in research and development. New materials, engine designs, and connectivity features were rolled out in a bid to appeal to a younger, more global audience. Electric motorcycles, which had once been a niche product, became a focus for expansion as the company sought to align itself with emerging trends in sustainability and urban mobility. The move enabled faster product cycles, with new models reaching the market more quickly and tailored to the specific needs of diverse customer bases. The brand's marketing underwent a transformation as well. Advertising campaigns, once filled with imagery of American highways and Route 66 nostalgia, now adopted a more cosmopolitan flair. The new message positioned Harley-Davidson as a global lifestyle brand, embracing riders from all walks of life and all corners of the world. The company launched cultural collaborations with international artists and fashion labels, hosted major riding events in new regions, and supported local motorcycle communities in its host countries. The notion of Harley-Davidson as a purely American icon faded, replaced by an identity that, while rooted in history, was now defined by global inclusivity and adaptability. However, this evolution was not without risks. Loyalists within the US remained skeptical, and the company faced persistent questions about whether the brand could truly maintain its aura without a direct link to American soil. Industry analysts debated whether the move abroad would dilute the company's essence, or if Harley-Davidson would ultimately emerge stronger by embracing change. The leadership team, aware of these anxieties, implemented programs to honor and preserve the brand's heritage. Museums, heritage rides, and storytelling initiatives kept the memory of Harley-Davidson's American origins alive, even as the company built its future elsewhere. As other U.S. manufacturers looked to Harley-Davidson's example, the event catalyzed broader shifts in trade strategy. Some companies adopted a China Plus One or Europe Plus One strategy, establishing at least one major plant outside their home market to provide flexibility in the event of further trade disruptions. Business schools began teaching Harley-Davidson's pivot as a case study in adaptation and global strategy. Consultancies and trade associations published white papers examining the pros and cons of reshoring versus offshoring, weighing factors like currency fluctuations, political stability, labor laws, and local consumer preferences. In this way, Harley-Davidson's move became more than a headline. It was a harbinger of the complex calculations now required in the age of global trade wars. The ramifications even reached into the legal and regulatory world. Trade attorneys found themselves in high demand as companies sought to navigate a patchwork of new tariffs, customs requirements, and export controls. Law firms set up dedicated practices to help businesses obtain import licenses, structure supply agreements, and challenge tariffs through international trade tribunals. For Harley-Davidson, this legal complexity required ongoing vigilance and adaptability, as new regulatory challenges could arise at any moment, threatening to disrupt operations or market access. Financially, the company's strategy paid off in stages. Initial costs were high. Relocating production, setting up new facilities, and supporting redundant workforces was a massive undertaking. But as the new plants ramped up and tariff-related costs were eliminated, margins gradually improved. The stock market reacted with volatility, with shares dropping amid uncertainty before stabilizing as investors recognized the long-term benefits of the shift. Institutional investors engaged the company's board in intense dialogue, scrutinizing each quarterly result for signs of progress or hidden risk. While some shareholders worried about the potential brand dilution, others applauded the boldness of the pivot, seeing it as an essential adaptation to global realities. As Harley-Davidson motorcycles began to roll off production lines in their new homes, a new era for the company began to take shape. The transition demanded continuous feedback loops, monitoring quality, adjusting supply chains, responding to local market demands, and managing the perceptions of customers and stakeholders. The leadership adopted agile management strategies, empowering regional directors to make fast decisions and encouraging a culture of experimentation. This flatter, more dynamic structure contrasted sharply with the top-down approach that had prevailed during the company's heyday in the US. The move also had unexpected cultural impacts in Harley-Davidson's new host countries. In some regions, the arrival of a global brand spurred a wave of local pride and aspiration. Motorcycle clubs and enthusiast groups sprang up, modeled after their American counterparts but infused with local traditions. Riding events became fixtures on the social calendar, drawing participants from diverse backgrounds and fostering a new sense of community. The company made efforts to give back, supporting road safety campaigns, sponsoring apprenticeships, and contributing to local charitable causes. Over time, Harley-Davidson was woven into the social and economic fabric of its adopted homes, taking on new layers of meaning that went beyond its origins. The American consumer's relationship with Harley-Davidson also evolved. As the brand's production base shifted abroad, buyers confronted a complex mix of nostalgia, pride, and ambivalence. Some remained fiercely loyal, valuing the company's engineering, reliability, and legacy above its country of origin. Others turned to smaller domestic brands or even custom builders to satisfy their desire for an authentically American ride. This diversification of preferences sparked a renaissance in the U.S. motorcycle scene as startups and artisan shops rose to fill the gap left by Harley-Davidson. In this sense, the company's departure created new opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship at home. For the U.S. government, Harley-Davidson's exit served as a cautionary tale and a wake-up call. Policymakers faced increasing pressure to reconsider the strategic aims of tariffs and to re-examine the complex interplay between trade, industrial policy, and economic security. Congressional hearings were held to investigate the broader impact of protectionist measures, and lobbyists from both sides of the issue descended on Washington to make their case. Some called for the relaxation or elimination of certain tariffs, arguing that American competitiveness required open markets and strong international partnerships. Others insisted that tough trade policies were necessary to force a global reckoning with unfair practices abroad. The debate was as much about identity and values as it was about economics, reflecting the nation's struggle to define its place in a rapidly changing world. The broader global community observed these developments with keen interest. For decades, the United States had positioned itself as the champion of free trade and open markets, leading efforts to build a rules-based international economic order. The imposition of tariffs and the resulting relocation of iconic companies like Harley-Davidson signaled a shift away from this model, raising questions about the future of globalization. Some countries responded by redoubling their own commitment to free trade, seeking to fill the vacuum left by a more inward-looking America. Others viewed the developments as an opportunity to advance their own industrial policies, aiming to attract more multinational investment and build up domestic capabilities. Within Harley-Davidson, the transition to a global company involved a rethinking of corporate culture. Diversity and cross-cultural competence became key values, as teams drawn from dozens of countries collaborated on everything from product development to marketing campaigns. The leadership invested in language training, cultural immersion programs, and international talent exchanges, creating a workforce that was both cosmopolitan and deeply committed to the company's mission. These efforts paid off in unexpected ways, as new ideas, perspectives, and approaches began to permeate every aspect of the business. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Harley-Davidson moving production abroad? What do you expect next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.